everybody, and welcome back to a brand new edition of Gospel of Galactus. This week, man, I am so very excited to be joined by not just one of the preeminent Dead Sea scholars, but a gentleman, if you watch the History Channel or Discovery or any of these things, if you're into these things, you may have actually seen him on some of these investigative channels doing things with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I will let him explain a little bit more about himself and what he's done. But we have a very interesting conversation for you today. And I will let Dr. Kipp Davis take over, and we will just kind of begin from there. Dr. Davis, man, thank you so much for joining us. And man, I'm just so thrilled to get into you, your background, and what brought us together. So yeah, why don't you give us the audience a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me, Josh. My name is Kipp Davis. I am a specialist in early Judaism and Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm a biblical scholar. And I mean that's where professional me lives. My narrower specializations like Scrabble practices and manuscript construction, and the transmission of literature and the Bible. But I guess what brought me into your orbit was my history as a an adopted parent. I have three boys, and all three of our kids, my wife and I adopted, and they came out of the foster home system, the foster system, I guess. So yeah, and I mean I have a lot of, so I guess, my own experiences with my kids.
You were pretty poignant in your life. It made a pretty significant change in your life, didn't it?
It really did. It was, and all this happened kind of at the same time that I had started my PhD. Like, we had adopted Jaden when he was 4, and it was like literally the year before, year thereabouts, I started my PhD, and then we adopted my younger two, who were 20 months and 3.5 at that time, and that was about a year or two later. And there was actually, I mean, this isn't something I've noted before, but there was actually a point after, I think, my 3rd year in the program, because I was starting at that point to get overwhelmed by just the work and the parenting, the new parenting, and many of the challenges that come with raising kids with acute attachment disorder. I was actually approached by my supervisor at one point, wondering if I was okay, because my output had decreased dramatically, and I ended up needing to get like an extension on my program of study just to complete it, because it just about collapsed my my life at that point. So yeah.
And for the audience who don't understand here, I'll kind of set the stage a little, and this will help for them to understand why Dr. Davis and I are discussing this. So growing into this, like myself, Dr. Davis had grown up in an extremely religious household. This is unlike myself. He grew up, I understand, very loving mother, father. I mean, the religion was there, but at least you I remember you saying you had a good time at home. Things were good.
Yeah, I had a great upbringing. I really did.
And you grew up within the faith. Your faith was really strong.
Yeah.
It actually, you weren't originally going to study the Dead Sea Scrolls, but by fate and circumstance, you got sucked into the lore. And amidst the backdrop of moving into this new field, adopting people, and at the time, I don't want to say challenging your faith, because I think that's the wrong way to put it. At the time, your education is informing what you had grown up believing, or how would you phrase it? I think it's probably better to ask you
Yeah.
how you phrase it.
So I think something else I want to kind of point out here too. You know, this is pretty fresh. Like just I just started watching, my wife and I just started watching last night the new Prime documentary
Yes,
about the
glad you
Duggars.
mentioned this.
The Shiny Happy People documentary. People seriously need to watch that. And I think I posted on Twitter this morning, like I'm actually kind of numb still after watching a couple of episodes of that, just because of how harrowing it is. But I have memories. Like I said, I had a great childhood and a very loving and committed family. But you know, some of this stuff was always sort of on the edges. Like I do remember distinctly that my dad had bought like they bought books from the Institute in Basic Life Principles, which is this cult organization behind, you know, the Duggar family. But it's we had stuff in the house, you know, on the shelves, and I'm sure, even though I'm so thankful that my parents didn't go like batshit crazy like some people do with this kind of thing, but you know, it made an impact, right? Like I can see, sort of looking back, elements of that whole world that touched my world, like lots of the weird
Later in life, though, don't
thinking.
they?
And
These
what's
memories,
that?
I said, these memories, they come up later in life because I've started noticing this
Yeah,
things that I remember seeing around the house that I thought nothing of at the time, but now with the information I have 30 years later, I'm
oh
like, wait
yeah,
a minute, that's what that was.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. So like I was going to say, like the whole weird reactions my parents had towards things like Halloween or certain
Simpsons.
toys, or
My
yeah,
mom
you know,
hated The
TV shows,
Simpsons.
movies that you can or can't watch. Music was a big one
Yeah.
in my house. And you know, just recently, things that come up. I had mentioned in, like, I think you got in touch with me after watching me tell my story on Myth Vision podcast.
Yes.
And my wife and I watched, so I gave that interview a few months back, after Derek had posted that on his channel. This time my wife had seen it, and so she sat down and we were watching it together, and she mentioned to me, I mentioned at one point that I was always quite bitter about the fact that I had to leave the house and go to church every Sunday night because we always missed Magical World of Disney, right? And so she starts telling me, she's like, oh yeah, she's like, that sucks so much, I hated that, I always got to watch like the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the show. I'm like, yeah, right, that was terrible. And then she says to me, she says, on those nights when we actually were able to watch the show, lots of times they had like two-parters, so you got to see like part one, but then the next week you couldn't watch part two. And I had to, when she mentioned that, I had to sit and think about it, and I'm like, honestly, I don't think I've ever actually seen the show ever, because we were never home on Sunday night.
Yeah.
Not ever. In this moment, I kind of had this realization. I was like, "Oh my God. I spent every Sunday night of my childhood in church. We
Yep.
never missed." And it was kind of it was an amazing, yeah, it was a sort of like one of those amazing realizations to me. And the difference between me and my wife was that she grew up on a farm, and like in the wintertime they get snowed in all the time, right?
Yeah.
So they couldn't go anywhere. I grew up in the city, and because of that, you know, the roads were always plowed, and we were always able to go to church.
You're
Yay.
like Abel, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
So
I was thinking about, because I was going to do a video at some point for the channel, just sort of tangentially about, like, everyone talks about what they grew up with, and I kind of laughed at, like, in an evangelical, I'm like, oh yeah, your parents watched what video games you played. Wait until I pull out some of the video games my mom bought me. I'm like, oh, you didn't have Bible Adventures? What, you didn't have Exodus or King of Kings? We can't talk. Like, I have these games still in my room, and I'm gonna go back through and, like, do a playthrough of these wisdom tree games and put that up on YouTube as, like, a throwback to, like, the people who
That
grew
would be
up. Like, my mom was insistent about, like, you can play video games. We're just gonna go down to the Bible bookstore and buy them down there. And I was like, all right, a win's a win. A win's a win, right? So
I wasn't I didn't play a lot of video games as a kid, so that's like a whole thing that I didn't experience, but I have I have a passing familiarity with some of that, but that would be amazing.
Oh, it's definitely gonna happen.
Bible video games. Oh yeah. That'd be pretty incredible.
I just found the I found the system I had with them all on it, and I got it all hooked up in the game room. And so as soon as everything dies down after the flood, I'm absolutely gonna record some playthroughs and post that on there for posterity, because,
you know,
oddly enough, those exactly games bring back some comforts.
As soon as things die down after the flood, it sounds exactly what Noah said. After,
right,
2 months on the ark, right?
2 months, and he said it to all the animals that were on there too. You know,
when I get off of this goddamn boat, you're gonna believe it.
And he's probably looking at his third wife while saying it too, like, you and me, we're done. But you know,
yeah, exactly.
Bringing up this religion, it's a perfect spot to kind of segue into what happened. So, I come from this very religious family that grew up in Texas. Now, my grandfather at the time was a Navy man, and similar to Derek, but not quite. My grandfather, he wasn't special forces, but what he was a mover and a shaker and a politician. And he ended up becoming John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson's telecommunications officer stationed in the White House during those 8 years.
Oh my God.
We actually have the presidential inauguration coins and stuff for Kennedy and Johnson and all of that stuff, and pictures in the Oval Office. Oh yeah. So, but my grandfather was also, if you've ever seen Harry Potter, you'll be familiar with the line where he's talking about Voldemort saying, oh yeah, he did do great things. Terrible, but great. That sort of line defines my grandfather, because in addition to achieving all of these awards and stuff within the military and our nation, he was also beating my grandmother and molesting my mother. And obviously, this really messed up my mom. He beat my grandmother deaf in her left ear to the point where she finally grabs her daughter and flees to California. I want to say my mom was about 15 or 16 at the time. Now, she'd had 2 other sons. One of them had cerebral palsy. And oddly enough, a kind of funny story about this is that she'd been trying to get him tested during this time, during like the 60s, and they just weren't figuring out like the seizures and everything. And my grandma is like freaking out because she knows something's wrong with her child, and the doctors are just telling her it's seizures. So finally, she throws a fit to my grandfather, who talks to JFK, and JFK tells my mom to take my uncle Johnny to his doctor in Bethesda, which is when they get the accurate diagnosis, CP and whatnot. And in true political fashion, I guess my mom went back to the hospital that the previous doctor was at that gave the diagnosis of seizure, and he had been reassigned. So to give you an idea of the kind of like where they're at, But yeah, so
Yeah.
my
Wow.
grandma knew when she fled, she needed to put about a half a country distance in between her and John. So she moves to California. Johnny had died at about 19 or 20. That was the end of his run with cerebral palsy. But my uncle Robert decided to stay with his father, and my mom comes out here to California. And somewhere along the way, she meets my dad, Matt, gets pregnant, and has me at about 16, 17 years old. Now, she
Okay.
keeps me about for the first 3 years, but she's also bouncing with friends, staying in her own place, kind of living with Mary at that same time. Now, this is a little sidetrack, but it's important to the story. So, on the other side of this, my Mary has a sister named Janice. Now, my Aunt Janice actually killed herself on Christmas, like in the year 2001, 2000, somewhere around there. But prior to all of this, and I think it had to do with her faith too, oddly. It's something I've realized later on. But my Aunt Janice had a daughter named Vanchi who was way worse than Karen, completely messed up on drugs, and she'd had my three cousins, Brandy, Jolene, and Dustin. But Vanchi was literally in no position to do anything. So Janice got custody of them and had been raising Dustin, Jolene, and Brandy was actually kidnapped by her father and taken to Arkansas until she was 16. We wound up tracking her down and kidnapping her back. But by that time, she was basically already an adult. But anyway, excuse me, I say mom, I'll explain why in a second. My grandma sees Janice get custody of those kids, and automatically the wheels start turning in her head because she's always had a very envious and competitive relationship with Janice. And she sees Karen having these problems. Now, Karen, my mother, has put me up for adoption 3 different times. But every family gave me back because I guess like this was like at the height of like ADHD when I wasn't sleeping at night. I don't know what these parents were saying. Like they wanted a child who slept at night. I don't know what kid that is, but I was always I was no more than 3. I was either from 0 to 3 before my mom got or grandma got custody.
Yeah.
But all 3 attempts at adoption, they gave me back because I didn't sleep. I cried all night and they just didn't want it. So eventually my grandmother steps in and there is a huge custody battle because Karen isn't trying to give it up. Mary's trying to take it. The judge ends up awarding Mary legal guardianship, but at that point, the family fractures and takes sides. So I go to live with Mary and her super evangelical husband, Richard, in Cerritos, and everything is
Is
good
that in
there.
Texas? Or is that California?
Southern California. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm living with them there. I went to Nazarene Christian school for grade school. Everything's going great, or at least I think it is. I go out one Halloween, and the next morning I come back from Halloween, and my mom, like the babysitter that had me spend the night for Halloween, goes in, and like my mom is just sobbing, or grandma, excuse me, is just sobbing in tears. My grandfather had a heart attack and died that night on Halloween. So she has me go and stay with this girl, Michelle, for a couple days while she figures out everything. But after Richard dies, everything kind of changes because he was a city planner for Long Beach and made a lot of good money. Now, Mary was an office manager for a private clinic and made some good money. But it's after this that her addiction to pills, and I later come to find out that she'd also been cheating on Richard the whole time. And this guy that I thought was my uncle, Frank, not quite my uncle. That was her Sancho. I don't. But anyway, after he dies, Mary remarries this dude, Jim, and that relationship falls apart because she cheats on him. And at this point, she decides to stay single. And she is spending so much of her time, like we're, of course, going to church this whole time, every Wednesday, every Sunday. But the reason she's going is because that's where singles group is. So even when we go to church, I have to sit while she goes to these singles lunches and brunches while these there for hours and hours. And she just makes me sit in the parking lot or the car or at the church while she's talking to these men. In fact, no joke. All right. So on my 11th birthday, I had a friend come over and I had desperately wanted him to spend the night because it's my birthday. But my mom had a date that night and she was honest with the friend. And so the friend's mom didn't feel comfortable leaving her son and I alone. So she says no.
Yeah.
And I'm like really bummed. But my mom leaves me home that night. And I'm in my room, dude, and I'm hearing all sorts of weird sounds, right? So I call the emergency number at the church and tell my mom. By the way, if you hear me call her mom, it's because at this point, there's a therapist in there who told my grandmother that she should replace my mother with me and have me call my mom by my sister. So she wants me to address my mom as my sister, her as my mom, and my grandfather as my dad during all this mess, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a mess.
Getting back to that night, I tell her, like, this is happening. And she's like, you know what? You need to stop bothering me. Like, it's fine. Irvine is the safest place. Just stop. I will be home tonight. I'm feeling unsafe, so I go and I lay down in her room. She does come home, and I had fallen asleep watching Major Payne in her room on VHS. I still remember the movie. And I was sleeping on the floor next to her bed. And as she turns, because I woke up when she turned out the light, but right when she turns out the light and the lights are going off, I see a pair of feet at the end of the bed. Ooh. And I'm like, Mom, turn the light back on. Yeah. There's somebody in the room with us. And she's like, no, there's not, Joshua. Just lay back down. I'm like, Mom, there's somebody in the room with us. You need to turn the light on. She's just like not listening to me. Finally, I do the kid thing that will get your parent up. Mom, there's somebody in the fucking room. Turn the light on. At that point, she jumps up to smack me, and a guy jumps up with a knife and grabs her. That dude had been in my closet the whole night. So anyway, he brings us around to the side of the bed, and he has us lay over it. And that's when he raises the knife up, and he's going to stab us. And, like, at this point, I freak out. I just run past the dude. Like, because he'd already tried to grab me once, but I realize I'm a little bit taller than him. So, like, I ran out one way. My mom goes out the other way. He goes out another way. It turns out the guy was only 14 years old. They catch him later that night, right? It was his gang initiation. He was supposed to murder 2 people.
Nuts. That's
crazy. And the only reason they were able to put him away is because of me and my testimony.
Yeah, wow.
And so after that, like, Mary just kept going out, and my behavior, like, I ain't even gonna lie, dude. Like, my behavior just tanked. Like she was never there.
Sure.
Like, she would beat me with objects. Like, one day on Christmas, like, she bought me a new hockey stick for Christmas. Yeah, she hit me in the face with it that morning and gave me a black eye. She wound up getting arrested. I had to go to Orangewood. Well, she decides at this point that I'm an imposition on her life. So she has me thrown in, first she has me thrown in College Hospital, Costa Mesa for them to check on my mental health. Obviously, they find out all this stuff is wrong, but Mary's convincing them she's the victim in this scenario. Like, I'm just acting out. She buys me everything. Of course, there's water on my floor now. Hold on one sec. Let me get a towel. I just spilled.
Sure. All right.
So, yeah, she's convinced everybody that she's the victim in this scenario, and that, I'm acting out, and she's given me everything that, a parent could possibly give a child, money, games. So at the end of all this, I decide I'm going to go live with my mom. So I get out of there. I go live with my mom, my actual mom, who's living with my Aunt Marla and my Uncle Brad. I'm going to Marine View Junior High in Huntington Beach, and I'm literally getting jumped and beaten up every day. In fact, at one point in school, I still remember the bullies' names, Tom Kelly and Jeremy Gattenby. I was just walking, and then I see an entire crowd of people coming toward me, and I just know. 10
Yeah.
people from school, like I'm a nerd kid. He just comes up and they all just jump me and beat me.
Yeah.
And the school blamed me. I got blamed for getting beaten up. So at this point, my actual mom, packs me up and moves me to Virginia with a dude she just met online. He turns out to be abusive and comes in the room in the middle of the night and grabs my dresser and breaks it to send a message to me. She immediately moves us out of that house and in with my uncle. But at that time, like, I'm getting abused, so I'm acting out like I'm not the best to their dogs because I'm getting abused, so I'm taking it out on something that can't protect it, which I still feel horrible. But after that, she puts me in Tidewater Hospital. And then I went to a group home. But because I was so tall, they put me in a group home with 15 and 16-year-olds at 12.
Oh, boy.
And then when I wasn't succeeding in the adult program, they sent me to juvenile hall. And then after I get out of juvenile hall, Mary throws this bitch fit like, you're not locking my kid up. She brings me all the way back to California, and then she puts me in Provo Canyon School for 3 years on 2 different trips, where I was just abused from the moment that I got there. Like, they didn't care about any of the extra stuff that Mary was doing. Like, they didn't care about the emotional abuse. They didn't care about the fact that she was literally trying to replace my mom with a relationship. Like, they didn't care about any of that.
Yeah.
To them, they saw the woman that was funding them as the person who's right, and the child that's in there is wrong. And to her credit, I never thought I would say Paris Hilton is my ally. But we were actually in that facility together. Her, me, Cameron Douglas, Michael Douglas's son, and another girl named Sasha Baris. All of us were actually in there at the same time. And Paris, to her credit, has been just an absolute warrior, getting in front of these crowds of people and just telling them like how bad Provo is. Like, to give you an idea of how bad that place is, there were 3 kids in there that wanted to run away. And they used to have a counselor that would stay overnight in the crap area. It was called investment. That's where you'd get sent if you were in trouble, right? One of the kids in investment, this is before they had tied the toilet lids to the back. They came up with a run plan idea. They had worked it out where they would go to ask to use the restroom in the middle of the night. And then when the counselor went in there, they hit him over the head with the back of the toilet, smashed it over his head, and tried to grab the keys and run. He had permanent brain damage.
Oh, yikes.
Like, the only reason they didn't get away is because of the sound of the toilet hitting his head was so unbelievably loud that the senior on who was in his office a couple doors down was like, that's something. He knew that was something. Like, I have never seen anyone punished like that in there. Like, they got the hell beaten out of them for that, which, I mean, I can kind of understand a little, but I mean, but anyway, like, I understand their position because they were getting beaten and abused in there all day long. So finally, I excel in school there because I just did. Something clicked over in my brain when I was in detention one day, and all of a sudden I solved a trigonometry problem. I couldn't even do pre-algebra, and I figured out a trig problem. And then the next thing I knew, it was another problem, and then another problem, and then another problem. And I just started doing as much schoolwork as I could. And before I knew it, I realized I was going to graduate. And once I found out I would graduate, Irvine Unified School District, which was paying for me to be in Provo Canyon School, would no longer fund it, which meant Mary didn't have the money for me to be in there. So I graduated to beat the system. And then she kicked me out as soon as I got home. And I've literally been living on my own ever since.
Wow.
And that's just a half of a nutshell of my story.
It's a hell of a story. Wow.
That's me.
And
so many different things and only touching on some highlights, dude.
Yeah. Or lowlights.
Lowlights.
Yeah. So
And of course, you
yeah,
have my faith in here with all of this, right? Like,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
was raised as a
You know,
Christian.
hmm I think this is something you know, when my wife and I started the adoption process, I often felt like maybe we were at a or maybe even our certainly our oldest kid was at a bit of an advantage. Just because like we weren't parents before, we had no expectations on like or I mean just like you had your own upbringing to draw from, right? And there were many things that she and I both agreed about that uh we were going to do differently than our parents. So I think with when it came to dealing with a kid that had like attachment disorders, we were very open and receptive to what the professionals were telling us about what to do and how to handle these situations when like our kids acted out, that it made it easier for everyone, right? um and I remember this too. I'm just kind of thinking through some of what you just told me, and drawing on my own experiences. This question, because of where we came from, and my own career ambitions, this question of religion actually did come up in the adoption process. And it was something that, like, we told them, well, we're Christians. We grew up Christians. We're going to, anybody who comes to live with us is going to live in a Christian family. And they were like, that's fine. And of course, I mean, that's going to happen, and we expect that. But, if you end up with a kid that has an indigenous heritage, are you gonna
Yeah.
be able to sponsor that and honor that and stuff? And I think early on, both she and I kind of committed to this idea that, the best way to go about doing this is to, like, um represent ourselves as honestly as we can, but ultimately help our kids understand and realize that this is their decision, and whatever they want to do is on them. And I think, it probably, it's sort of an interesting social experiment in some respects, because I think um we are the more hands-off approach that we took with regards to like the religion question in our family as parents, um probably contributed a lot to how easy it was for my kids when she and I finally did deconvert, how easy it was for them to go, oh yeah, this is all this stuff is bullshit anyways,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, and but so much of that, it just was wrapped up into, I guess, um some of our realization that our kids are not going to be like normal kids, right? And so we're going to have to take a different approach in terms of some of this stuff. And yeah, like my oldest son, he was our house was his 10th
Did
placement
he
by the
take
time he
everything
was
with him
5.
wherever he went, man? Like, I would always
Oh
have like a
yeah, yeah.
bag of
And it was
one
the
stuffed
saddest thing.
animal that had to go with me everywhere. It didn't matter where.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is something that really, really stuck out to us when we started the process. Uh, we were always kind of committed to this idea that, when we've got a kid living in our home, and once we've said yes, this is something that we're doing, we're gonna do it, right? And Jade, my oldest son, had actually, like, he had one of those interruptions was actually a failed adoption. Like, he was placed for adoption and was with a family for 3 months before
Nothing
they sent
harder
him
than
back.
that.
Yeah, and when we found this out too, that was just the thing. I was just, my wife and I were both just like, I don't even know
Like, how do you do
how.
that?
Like yeah,
Like, what was I
I
doing
just,
at
I couldn't
3?
figure it out.
Like, what was
Yeah,
I
how
doing?
old would he would have been? I think he would have been like 4 years old when that happened, and yeah, it did. It messed him up. I'll tell you, the
To this day,
so the
I still
day,
take a backpack with me. I just
sure.
realized that talking to you, like, that's why I got emotional, is I
Oh wow.
just realized
Yeah,
I still take that bag with me whenever I go
yeah,
somewhere just because of that. Just
yeah.
realized
And
it.
it's,
Sorry, go ahead.
and this is, no, like, this is always challenging for my kids too, right? Like, to this day, any kind of big transitions like that, you know, the
Change is so
prospect,
scary.
my kids are, yeah, and my oldest, he's 24. This year is going to be 25 next year, and we kind of told him, we said, it's time for you to, you know, get out on your own and find your own place. And he finds that really, really difficult still.
It's
And he has to remind us
so
of that too.
daunting. Yeah, it's
So,
so daunting because especially when you're in our situation, because people are like, it's time, and you're like, but I don't know if I'm ready. Like, I don't know if I can
oh
succeed.
yeah.
Like, when I
And,
was like, dude, my wife has got to be the most patient human being on the planet. Like, I was never taught, financial habits. I knew how to
yeah,
clean because that's what I was told to do every single day.
boy.
The fact that I have been in a monogamous relationship is something that is completely foreign to my family. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, well,
Like, you know,
how long have you guys been married?
since 2016, but we've been together since like 2010. Like, we met in
Oh,
grad
good.
school, and it's just kind of
Good
like,
for you.
yeah. So, but
Way to
like,
go.
we were kind of like not always together during that time, but like it's been pretty much like consistent though. But like, she's just been so
Yep.
patient. Like, even the other day when I was handling just the flood, like, I took over for her because I could just see like she was mentally exhausted, having to deal, like, our
Yeah.
dog had cancer. Fortunately, we got that
Oh
taken
boy.
care of. He's cancer free. Woo, go Husky.
Oh, good.
But you know, all of that plus the emotional drain was like, when this happened, I kind of took over that for her. And the other people, when they talked to her, they're just like, man, we love dealing with him. He was so nice. He complimented us, told us he appreciated our services. And she's just like, do you realize how far you've come as a human being? Like, you used to not
Wow.
even be able to stand in line, and like, now people are
Wow.
thanking you
Yeah.
for your patience and your the way that you treat them. But
Yeah.
like, even these things are only like recent things for me, because every little step in life is like one of those things. It's like, man, I feel so far behind the curve at 40, just because when
Boy.
anybody was in high school learning even just the basics about life, I had to ask permission to pee, and had to
Oh
ask
yeah.
permission to sit in
Wow.
anything other than an Indian style, like, pardon the, that's what we were told,
Yeah,
we
yeah. See,
cross-legged. We were,
yeah.
we had to ask for permission to sit in any other fashion. And it's just like,
Yeah.
that's what I grew up with. And it's just, I think, to me, I knew the first time at an early age that I had a problem is, I remember my great grandma was staying over. My grandma had gone somewhere, but like, I had said my nighttime prayers and everyone was out. And I started thinking about, oh, heaven and forever. And then I kept sitting there and I was like, and forever and forever. And it just like kept going in my head about, even at that age, I think I understood what that was. And I had a panic attack in the middle of the night. I was like, I don't want that. Like, that doesn't
Hmm.
sound fun to me. And my grandma came in
Yeah.
and she's like, why are you crying? And I'm like, because I don't want to be in heaven forever. That sounds horrible. And then she had to explain to me
Yeah.
why it wasn't. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, if you have to explain to me why
Is
it's not
that
a bad thing,
okay? Yeah, is that any good? Wow. I don't know. I still don't know if I want to be there. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, that was I think with we've sort of seen all sides of this this kind of yeah, this situation with all three of our kids, right? Like I said, my oldest has issues with has always had issues with separation, and there was a sense of like for a long time just it felt like he was not like he needed to learn empathy
Yes.
just
Yeah.
almost from the get-go, right? And that was challenging. Like my middle son still has pretty crippling anxiety.
Who had been in the
um
system the longest out of the kids? Was there one that had been
Jay,
in there like
my oldest would have. It was definitely the roughest on him. Yeah, yeah, he was in the system from the time he was basically a year old, and then up until we adopted him and had 10 placements. And I was going to tell you that like the day that because you asked about him carrying his belongings around and stuff, that the day that he that the social worker came to the house, she was coming to the house pretty regularly. And then after we finished up all the paperwork and everything, she came this one last time and said to us, this is my last visit here. And she talked to us for a few minutes, and then she said, she's like, okay, I'm just going to say something to Jade, to my son just before I go, because she's like, the case is closed, I'm done, probably never see him again. And so he was yeah, so we're in the living room, and he comes down the stairs, and then she just says to him, she says, hey, she's like, can I talk to you? And his eyes just got big, right?
Oh, yep.
And he
Yep.
turned, and he walked to like the other end of the house, and he pressed himself up against the wall. And I was just like, because he was so scared that she was just gonna tell him,
Did we have to
pack your
take
stuff, we
you?
gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so she would, and she was like, okay, yeah, sure, you stay there. She's like, I'll just
She
stay
know
over here.
she can play with him because she knows it's a good ending, right? Like I'm sitting here
Yeah,
crying, but like it's a good
exactly.
ending.
But oh yeah, but it did. It was one of those things that just like it broke my heart. And just watching this happen broke my heart. But so I think it was the roughest. It probably would have been the roughest on him. And in many respects, like I think he has, I mean, how long is he's been with us now for 19? He's 24, right? So yeah, pretty much 19, 20, almost 20 years. But I think out of all three of our kids, he's probably, maybe the most closely integrated with my wife and I. I mean, all kids, and it's amazing to see. I have to say that too, because like, um, it's a struggle. Yeah, it's
There's
a struggle for
moments. There's
kids.
moments like those
Yeah,
sincere moments. There are those moments when you feel like you're going through the motions, and then there's those moments where you feel like, okay, did this person and I think we had a meeting of the minds here. Like
yeah.
it's those little things that slowly turn into a relationship. Like, and it's slow. It's
And
so
it's really slow. And sometimes, like, I don't know how many times my kids have screamed at me, and you're not my real dad,
yeah.
I'm this kind of stuff, like just constant, like it's happened so
It's
many
the
times.
fear.
And they still, yeah. But then there are moments, right, like where, so about a week and a half ago. Yeah, it was last Wednesday. My wife and I were out for our first bike ride of the season. Didn't get very far. We literally got like 200 meters down the trail, and she fell and broke her foot.
Oh no.
But yeah, I know. So, but in the course, like I had to run back to the car, um, and then I to get something, and when I ran back, she was in massive pain, but she had grabbed her phone and had started calling the kids, and the way you do this too as a parent, you always start with the oldest and just kind
Yep.
of start working your way down,
Worm
right?
your way
And the
down from
oldest
there.
two, yeah, the oldest two didn't pick up, like they weren't around for whatever reason, and my youngest son, who in many respects has had like there's been some big challenges there, um and he has I was gonna ask you about that too, because
Yeah,
he's
please.
not like he's got like with him more than the other two, this uh how do I put it, this unresolved relationship with his biological parents, even though he
Yeah.
almost
You
didn't
don't want
know them
anything to
at
do with
all,
them, but
right?
there's still some deep-seated issues there, like I have with my mom. Like my
Yeah.
Karen died in 2020. Actually, the irony of this is that she'd had met a man that she was totally happy with, but then he suffered a stroke and she left him because I guess she, quote,
Hmm.
that's not what she signed up for. I guess I missed that part in the vow because I
Oh.
thought it was covered. But anyway, the cruel irony of this
Oh,
is
stop it.
that she ended up having an ischemic stroke herself and passed away in 2020, right before COVID. Um,
Yeah.
but I had about 7 years prior to that. The last time I spoke with Karen and Mary is Karen played me off of Mary one last time. The only thing Mary had really done for me up until that point was covering the cell phone while I was in grad school. Well, Karen decided that while she wasn't doing anything, she thought me being in grad school wasn't I wasn't doing enough. I needed to have a job too, is what she thought. I needed to be
Oh, okay.
responsible, were her words. And so, in order to teach me responsibility, what Karen decided is that she would have Mary give her my cell phone number, and Karen would pay the
Mm.
bill, and then I would learn how to survive on my own. So I found out that when
Oh,
my
wow.
phone was
Yeah.
disconnected by Karen texting and saying like, well, we decided you needed to grow up. And I was like, well, here's what
Oh
I've
my God.
decided. I'm never talking to any of you guys again. I'm done. Like, I'm out. I don't want anything to do with this. And I didn't. I didn't talk to her again. She wrote me letters, didn't care. She died, didn't care. But
Yeah.
the deep-seated issue thing, the thing that stays there, I think the thing that bugged me and nagged at me, it was never the actual relationship itself. It was this genuine feeling of, I think, three things. The first thing is that you missed out. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. When you look
Yeah.
around and you see anybody in a moment having a bad time and they even just call like, hey
Yeah.
mom, you don't even have that. That's the biggest thing. The
Yeah.
second thing is that you have to, at some point, and this is probably the hardest because it's incumbent upon the individual and nobody else can do this for us. You have to, at some point, come to the realization one of two things. This person either wasn't capable or did not want to take care of you. And those are the hard two options. And
Yeah.
normally it's not an either or fallacy.
Yeah.
But in this situation, I think it's better to present it that way because if you say that they weren't able to, then it allows for some sort of personal forgiveness, not to them, but to yourself.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you say that they just didn't want to, that's fine. But then you have to, the third thing that kind of springs out about this is, are you going to carry around that anger?
Hmm.
If you
Yeah.
decide that it's because they didn't want to, are you going to be angry about this for the rest of your life? Because I was. And it took me until I was probably 35 or 36 where I just stopped being angry.
Mm.
Just angry.
Yeah.
It was just this feeling of like not being screwed, but just being so fucking
Yeah.
fed up and just
Yeah.
being told that you're loved. God loves you. God this entire life by
Mm.
family that treated you like a dog. That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
Beautiful
That,
thing your
yeah.
kid
And
has is that he has you guys. And I think that the second and third part are something that you can at least be there for him with, and let him know that it is something he's going to have to figure out on his own, but that whatever he decides, you're going to support him and understand
It's cool. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
That's the hardest
So,
part.
and he's easily like with him, he's been like it's been that piece certainly has been like I've heard the fuck off, you're not my dad from him more than the other two by far, right?
But it's not even about that.
So
what that is in that moment is it's testing. He's testing. He wants to see if you're going to come back.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing for me is I always pushed people away is where could I set up my wall such that I could either watch you come over it. So like I had a viewpoint to see where you were coming from and I could judge your actions, or that you just couldn't get through it.
Yeah, and there's such a there's such a delicate balance as a parent too that you're trying to figure out between, because you want to pull them in, right? And you want to stop them and protect them, but you can't always. Like there are times where you have to let go. And
they have to hurt.
Finding that balance. Yeah, and I was going to say though, there's these moments that are really good though, like when my wife in agony on the ground with her broken foot and her phone, she got through to him and he was just finished work, and he was like she needed someone, she thought we might need someone to bring drive out a pair of crutches so that we could get out of the woods, right? And he's like, okay. And he was just like, he was on his way to the house to do this. But I managed to get her out on my own. So when I got into the car, I just called him back and I said, don't worry about it. I'm like, we're on our way to the hospital now. And he's like, I'm turning around and I'm going to meet you there. And like, I didn't ask for this, right? And he just, he was there when I pulled in with the wheelchair, and he stayed with her like all night.
Because he knows. That's because he knows.
And as a parent, I think like it's just that, right? Like it's so much of it is cutting through the stuff and recognizing like the terrible things that my kid says to me. Like he doesn't mean it. Like I know that deep down, I know, as much as it hurts, I know he doesn't mean it, and I can't react to that.
That would be my advice. Yeah. React to like he did when he said, like, I'm going to be there. Like in that moment, and what you're going to find too. And I think that this is really cool because I think that there's something really, really precious that comes out of all of this. And at least it has with me and my wife. You're going to find an amount of loyalty to you that I honestly do not think a normal child actually has for their parent. And I'm not just saying that, dude.
And I've seen glimpses of that too. Like it's fierce.
It's fierce.
I don't know how else to put it. Like we have a neighbor that we don't particularly like very much. He's not great. And like a few years back, my kids were playing basketball out on the driveway, and the basketball went into his backyard, and they had to climb the fence to go get it. And that really pissed them off. So they're the next time they're bouncing the basketball, they're playing basketball, and ended up in the driveway, and before anybody could go over there to get the ball, somebody had like run out of the house and grabbed it and ran back into the house in it like a child, right? Like it was just the stupidest thing. And so my kids are like, what's going on? So they knocked on the door, right? And they're like, and these people are like, we're not going to give you the ball back until you go get your parents, and we're going to have a talk about this. And so they came and they got us, and we went over there, and these people were just like, and it was this craziness, right? Like out in the driveway, they're yelling, and my wife and I are like, responding. You're like, and then at one point my kids are kind of standing back, but then the woman started picking at my wife and saying, you must not something to the effect of you must not be a very good mother, or you should something because of the way you're. And
No.
my kid lost it. Like he just lost it and started screaming at this woman. And
The look on
it
her
was kind of
face.
one of those things
I
where I was
bet
like,
she
holy
didn't see it coming
smokes.
either. I bet the look on
No,
her
probably
face.
not. But yeah, it's that loyalty is when it comes out, it's fierce. It's pretty amazing.
It's
But
really special,
yeah,
man. That's the precious thing that comes from this, is because
yeah,
in this situation there's something that you learn. And it's something that, a lot of people say in life, like, you don't have to be blood to be family. You find out who your family is. The one thing about being a
yeah,
foster kid or an adopted kid is, yeah, you do. You find out those who want to be around you. And when you find those people, the key thing is to just not push them away. And as long as you're able to work through and let him know, like, hey man, like I will never let you push me away. You can call me the biggest piece of shit on the planet and that I'm the worst dad ever. I'm not going anywhere, dude. And honestly,
yeah,
like, he probably knows it by now, and it sinks in more every day. Like, honestly, that's the cool thing about this, is you spend a lot of time in your head when you're a foster child, just because that's all you really have time to do.
yeah,
So it
right.
sort of becomes a way of
Yeah,
life. And introspective and internal thinking and thinking about what's happened to you throughout the day is a process that occurs so often and so fast that you may
yeah.
find he processes things just a hell of a lot faster. And then tap into that energy if
Interesting.
you see
Yeah,
it.
right.
If you see that
Yeah.
energy,
No, that's a
tap
good
into
idea.
that, because that's that unknown plus of being
Yeah,
a foster kid.
right, right. Yeah.
That's what got me,
Wow.
like, just constantly going, is once I figured out that I had this brain and this insatiable appetite to learn, and it came from having to watch every single thing around me at all times,
Mhm.
knowing who was going where I could be going. It's just, it forces you almost into like a CIA mindset, and you become like a pretty decent critical thinker and processor as a result of
That's
it.
interesting, eh?
And a lot of the
Yeah.
kids I knew in foster care would be really good about problem solving in some of those senses, because they knew that when they had this problem, they could fixate on it. Because, I mean, hell,
Hmm.
what else are you going to do? Just focus on the
And you
problem, fix it.
probably, yeah, you probably have an especially acutely tuned bullshit detector
Yeah,
as well, right?
you
Like,
do.
and I think that's sort of like on this piece, on that religion piece, right? Like I keep thinking, and that's kind of where I keep going back to is so like I mean, I'm a scholar. I'm a biblical scholar, a scholar of ancient history. So I know i- for lots of people in my position, they deconstruct and they walk away from the faith as a result of like what they learn about the actual truth of the Bible,
You can't help it.
and yeah, and that kind of, I mean, on many levels, that is what happened to me. But I think I said this in the Myth Vision interview. I've said this other places too. The thing that was really the clincher, though, was my relationship with my children, and going through this whole process of adoption, just because you see like you see the inconsistency between like the way an environment, like a natural environment and a social environment, has shaped a kid. And I think the thing that was so astonishing to me was how early this happens, right? Like it's a matter of literally days and months, is what they're telling us, is that like attachment, a disruption attachment, or an attachment disruption that happens, within days or weeks of birth, will affect a kid for the rest of his or her life, right? Like that was just it was just so astonishing to me at how much like these natural forces have an impact, to the point where I was like, this just does not jive with
Yeah.
what with what the Bible or what religion generally teaches you about human nature or the human condition, right?
And
It
it
just
almost
doesn't.
makes you visceral about it. Like, I was watching you on the
Yeah.
interview, and towards the end of it, like, you were getting angry, and I think rightfully so. Like, this is where I really connected with you because, okay, I'm going to swing this into something. Okay, fuck it, controversial. All right, so let's talk abortion, right?
Okay.
So when anybody ever brings
Okay.
this up, I'm like, cool, dude. You want to talk abortion? Let's talk abortion. You don't think it should happen? Why? Well, I think there's plenty of other things like adoption or foster care. Really? You think that? Have you ever been in adoption or foster care? Well, no, but I know. Well, then shut the fuck up. That's it. Like, and that's where I
Yeah.
get viscerally angry about it, because these people talk about foster care and adoption as if it's a realistic solution. Like, I wasn't abused my whole life in that system. Like,
Oh
how
yeah. Like,
how do
oh
you run this with, like, do you know how many people I've cried to for and I was like, you know what, man? Do you know how many times in my life I've said I wish I were aborted over being in the situations that I've been in? Like, if you can't imagine that, then you probably shouldn't be telling somebody else what to do with their body. And that's where I
yeah.
just get so irate.
Yeah,
Is
I believe it.
never
I
tried
believe
to
it.
talk to these kids? Have you met a kid in the foster system? Like, it's not a good place. It's not a good solution to this.
No. And
It,
as much as
good
like
people like you
I
just
think
aren't adopting enough.
no, that's true. And we're not like it's not like my wife and I haven't like fucked up royally all the time with her. Like we're constantly, I mean, being a parent is hard enough. And then being a parent of kids with special needs, you're gonna make all sorts of mistakes along the way. But I think like the people who helped us, the social workers and the people in the system, I thought were terrific, and they were doing their goddamn best, right?
Yeah.
But when you spend, and I've had like we've the way it works, I'm in Canada.
Yeah.
The way
Yeah.
it works in Canada is each province is operates their own ministry of family and children or whatever. So we've adopted kids out of two different provinces, two
Oh,
different
okay.
systems, and they've operated quite differently. So like when our oldest, we first met him at what's called an adoption party. I don't know if
Yeah. Yeah.
you know about these.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I thought, like, when we went to this, for people who might watch this and don't know, so an adoption party is like where kids who are in the system, who are ready, I guess, for adoption, and then adoptive families, social workers will make these matches on paper. Like this family would be a good match for this kid with this family, and so they'll invite everybody to like this neutral location, and it's like a party with games and toys and activities and things, and it's supposed to be like this neutral, non-threatening environment in
Icebreaker
which you
ground for
can,
kids and parents to interact and
and
determine whether or not it's going to be a
also
good
a
fit.
moment for people or kids to go, and for social workers to say, oh, that that's not going to work, or it is, so that was, and we thought like our experience with that was pretty good. And then it took like the adoption went through and everything was good, and then we moved to a different province, and when we went into the adoption process again, we found out that these adoption parties are like frowned upon
Oh yeah.
by, and we're like,
It's considered
really?
child
Wow,
shopping
it's
is the way that they see it, is because they're
right,
usually
yeah.
They're usually taking the best and most presentable kids instead of
Yeah,
maybe the people that might need it the most, which I understand, but
totally get that. Yeah,
it's a
totally
catch
get that.
22 because what are you going to do? Take the kid that's throwing something at a wall? Like you, it's so hard from both sides. But yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
frowned upon, but still
absolutely.
happen.
Yeah. So, but then in the other system, like in this other system that
Yeah.
we adopted through, the other way they do it, like they did the match on paper, and what you're actually supposed to do is the adopting parents, the whole family is actually supposed to go and basically move in to like the foster home for like a full week. This is what they call it, the transition, and you're actually supposed to spend all that time there. And I thought you know, when they presented this to us, we're like, wow, this is bizarre.
Is
And
this like a rental house that you guys like all move into for like a week? I've
no,
never
it's
even heard
supposed
of
to
this.
like because this is something I was like, this can't be normal. This isn't what you do all the time. And they're like, well, yeah, this is, and it's
This
just,
is like
you
an
know,
on-site thing at the adoption agency where they have, you know what? Actually, I think I may have heard something similar to this.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
But
if it's
it made
on site, then yeah, I think I have. It's still weird, but
so it is very, I found it very awkward because you're going into somebody else's house,
it's like
right?
wife
And the
swap, right?
idea is kind of. So, but I don't know about you, but I when I go into somebody else's house that I've not been in before, I don't feel especially comfortable, you know, trying to find things in the kitchen, and so it just it always
Like sitting
felt to
there.
me very intrusive with, yeah, for everybody. It was just really awkward. So yeah, so we saw several sides of this thing, and but I was going to say, like, through all this, like, I've come to recognize that there's huge problems in the system, in every system,
Yeah.
and everyone's doing their best, and all you can do is just say, you know what, you're doing your best, and I can make recommendations about how I think you can be doing this better, but it's still, you know, it is not a good place
No,
for kids. It's
no.
not. You know, I did my youngest, um it was sort of an interesting situation with my youngest two are actually full brothers.
Oh, cool.
um
That's
so
fortunate for them.
yeah, but it's a little strange. It was always a little strange for both of them because they were full brothers, but both were removed from their biological mom in the hospital, like right after she gave birth. So they were, up until they moved in with us,
They
they
didn't
had
even know
never
each
lived
other.
together. They did, because as part of the, like, you know, they had
Okay, so
to
they had to
they
this.
had
They
to
had to like
they
let them
had
interact.
visits all the
Okay.
time, you know, so they were, but they're really little, right? So they're kind of like, you know, you're like, oh, that's your brother, and they're kind of like, oh, whatever, you know, kind of thing, right? It didn't really mean anything to them, and they weren't, well,
Acting like it.
my youngest was still a toddler. He wasn't even verbal yet, right? And then my middle son was uh you know, getting on um like preschool age. So but anyways, so our youngest, we actually knew while he was in care because he was with the one of the foster families that had him were good friends of ours.
Oh,
And he maintained that relationship with them for a long time. And they had other foster kids in care. They had a couple of native kids living with them for a long time. And the two of them, my youngest and one of these boys are the same age, and they were like best friends for from the time they were 3 years old. And then, because of the way the system works here, um the the band, like the native band from where
Right.
they come, they always have kind of a right of first
Yeah,
refusal.
don't they get if the tribe wants them, that they get the child first, right?
Yeah. And they made this decision, like when this boy was like 14 years old, the band just decided, we're moving you out of this foster home in which you've lived for 11 years, and we're just going to move you back onto the reserve, which is out in the middle of nowhere. And they just moved them into basically like a place by themselves, and they had workers coming in to, you know, look in on them and make sure they weren't getting into trouble. But like, I mean, they're kids. And
Yes.
what kind of a it's a super messed up situation. But and it's one of the things where like the ministry didn't have any control over this, because it's up to the band. But and I understand, again, like there's this deep cultural
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
component to this,
you're not
right?
arguing against the tribe having the child. That's not what's going on here. We're taking the child out of a
Yeah.
situation that he's known his whole life, off of a
Yeah.
decision that people he's probably not met, because I mean he may know the tribe, but as I understand it in Canada, it doesn't even have to be a family member. It just has to be the tribe itself, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he
It's
may or may
and
not even know them, and you're taking this kid away from family, friends at a very young age. And I'm here to
yeah.
tell you, it sucks. It doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it could have been. It
And
could have
it
been.
is, yeah. So and I mean, thank goodness, like my son and him are still in touch. They're still friends.
Oh,
He was
good.
actually at my house here a couple of days ago. But like it has messed him up, like
I don't doubt it.
pretty badly. Like it's just it's yeah, I
The
don't
thing I
think like
worry about
people.
that is I hope that his relationship with your son, through no fault of his own, because I know, and I've been in this situation, sometimes
Hmm,
like that jealousy crops up,
boy,
not
yeah.
because it's animosity, it's because you look and you're like, I was so close to that. And that should have been me too. And it's like, it sucks because you
Yeah.
can't say that it should have been you. And I'm not saying this kid's going to do that. I just know that in that situation, I know that's how I'd feel.
It could happen, right? Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. And I don't know. I mean, I I hope I hope not.
I hope not
And
too.
so far, like he's a really good kid. But yeah. No, but yeah, the system is it is not a solution. It is a how do you put it? It is, I guess, a necessity that kind of works sometimes, but most of the time is the yeah, it's just yeah,
If
yeah.
it works, I haven't met a person for whom it works. Like, honestly, like
Right, yeah.
if it does, I have yet to meet.
No, yeah, it there's all yeah, yeah, there's all sorts of problems with it.
So,
And I have no doubt that it's like this everywhere you go.
yeah, but you
So,
know what though? The fortunate thing here is that as with your kids and as with myself, is that there's some positive outcomes here, and I think like, and this offer extends to any of your kids if they ever need to talk to somebody who just like fully understands it, and they're just like, Dad, I can't talk to you about this issue. Feel free to give them my number. Like, I know I'm a stranger,
yeah.
but I'd
Well,
absolutely get it in a minute, man. Like
yeah.
I've done the running. I've done it all, man. Like I've just done it. Um, but what I do
Well,
want to do,
I certainly appreciate the offer.
yeah, for sure, man. It's just, hey, children are a precious thing, and I
Yeah.
also, if you ever just need to talk to someone about something, got something going on in your head, like I said, man, like I'm
Sometimes,
always free
and
to lend an ear.
like this, yeah, this has been good, because sometimes you do need to talk. Like nobody in our family has ever adopted before, so like nobody knows or quite gets. We had a moment and it has it's one of those situations where like you're as an adoptive parent, your kids, um when you're out in public or where you're with other, normal families, right? You have a tendency to feel like, wow, we are so fucked up. But,
Really? Because more and more
it's
these days, I'm looking around thinking, man, it might be normal, but that's an American thing right now. Canada's not really having the
maybe, I
same
don't know.
problems we are.
Yeah, no, that you're right about that. So, but like, and there are lots of times, when so I'm thinking of some fairly recent within the last few years. We had like my kids are not, they don't talk to my mom, like
Sure.
they're
Your
just
grandma.
because their grandmother. So they have, she has had a difficult time, and her husband as well, um, who is not my dad. He's like a well, he's not even really a stepdad. He's just the guy she married.
You
But
just some dude.
like, yeah. So they've had a difficult time, adjusting to just the way our kids behave, right? Just because there's these attachment behaviors that will look different from,
Especially
like,
to an older crowd.
I
They
hate saying
lot of it is
exactly. Yeah,
ingratitude and just being rude or standoffish. Like I
yeah,
knew I would
exactly.
sit quietly in like my grandma, like I would get chastised for not interacting, but like I was afraid to interact because I
Hmm.
didn't know if I was going to
Oh,
get in
sure.
trouble.
Yeah, right. Because you don't know how to, there's things you don't know how to do, and you're also still testing the boundaries of these relationships, which are confusing to you, and that looks strange and disrespectful, and it's frightening to
Yeah,
people,
I
right?
can
In those sorts
understand
of
why he doesn't
situations.
talk
So,
to her anymore. If you feel like you're walking on
well,
eggshells, I wouldn't do that either.
yeah. So, and that was, there was, so there was an incident, and uh in sort of the aftermath of it, my wife and I were explaining to my mom, this is what our kids are like, and they've always been like this because this is where they came from, and this
Sure.
is what they went through, and because of this, we can't do things, and we can't respond the way you think we should, or the way you responded to your kids, because it just doesn't work. Like, like you have to do things differently, and that is, it's challenging for people to get that right. So sometimes, all that to say, it's nice to be able to talk to someone every now and then who gets it, right?
To
Who,
sort of at least understands like those little
yeah,
things. 'Cause I know there's like you bring up just like him, and I had already put myself in those shoes, like, yep, sitting in those rooms, and like the amount of time people just thought I was being rude or standoffish or
yeah,
anything. Like, in those times when I would try and go and be gregarious, they'd be like, your son is playing around in my house too much. Can we like put him in one room or something? And it was just like, I felt I couldn't win for losing as a child,
yeah,
especially around
yeah.
half of these religious folk when you're coming in, you never know what's okay, what's not okay.
Oh yeah.
And just,
And so much, like, yeah, so much of like these evangelical Christian cultures are constructed on traditional ideas about what a family ought to look like, and what kids ought to be, and how they ought to behave, and how they ought to respond, right? It's all these oughts, like, this is what
yeah.
there's a and it just it doesn't
It
it
doesn't
doesn't work
apply.
for any. I don't think it works for anybody or most people, and even more so when you add trauma to that situation.
I knew
And
no
it's
matter,
just
my
all
wife and
bad.
I, we were gonna have kids, but then like something happened, like nothing physical, like just time passed, and all of a
Hmm.
sudden we kind of looked at
Yeah,
each
yeah.
other and we're like, I've rethought it. She's like, oh, thank God, so have I. That's what I wanted to tell you about. When you were dreading with your wife about the whole, like, how do I tell her about deconverting? One day I
Yeah,
was just
right.
finally in the pen, and I took a huge hit off the weed pen, and I was just like, so I've kind of rethought it, and I don't want any kids. And she's like, oh my God, thank you. I just kind of just threw it out there, and she's
Oh, that's
I
funny.
was like, maybe we can adopt down the line because I really think I could be beneficial to someone there. I said, but as opposed to just like
Yeah.
straight, nah, no, no. But I always knew, like, no matter what, because I'd been just like this whole idea of do not spare the rod. Like, I'm sorry, man, I can't do that. And it's almost like you said, you start with the one compromise, like, well, I'm not going to do that. Let's, like in that article I sent you, she's like, well, I'm not going to hit my child. And so your faith starts unraveling slowly because you're like, well, if I don't have to follow that rule, well, what about that one? And then that one. And
Yeah.
then you start looking at it and
Yeah.
you're like, wait a minute.
You're
I
faced
mean,
with like kids who, yeah, I know, I totally get it. I mean, I just so many things like questions of now, especially like gender identity
yeah.
and sexual orientation, or even like this one, like for us was, like uh just sexual activity, like
Yeah.
among my kids, right? Like this is just when I was growing up, this was just this was just a non-starter, right? Like you just did not even ever entertain the idea of avoiding sexual contact with someone else
I remember
before you
when
were
we had
married was
sex ed at my
to be
Christian school, it was like a month, not the event itself, but like the lead up to like every parent having to be told, because this was at an evangelical Christian school, so the parents knew it was
right,
happening,
yeah.
but just even the lead up, they had to hold seminars for the parents, like they broke,
Oh my
like it
God,
was, but that
they
was
make
it.
it
That was the
super
only
weird
time
then.
we ever talked about sex. That's it. We were told you
Yeah,
don't have it
yeah,
and you don't talk about it. And I'm like,
yeah,
yeah, okay, all right, I'll get right on that. But
yeah.
it just,
But it's one of those things where like we were ill prepared for this because of our upbringing, right?
yeah.
But like all of my kids are sexually active, right? And it happened like way younger than I was expecting it to. And what, oh my God, what do you do with this? And like, yeah, it's just it's there's it's just such a different world that the the ways in which I was raised and what I was brought up with, it just doesn't work. It
Oh,
just
I
doesn't.
I think that would be, not to take up too much more time. I think that would be my big question for you. You brought up
Okay.
talking about this stuff, and you mentioned it, and I'm so with you on this. You're like, I'm not out to destroy anyone's faith. I'm not out to do this stuff. What I'm out to
Hmm.
do is put an end to this hatred that is continuously going around right
Yeah.
now. And I think, like, I'm just in this mood where I'm like, you cannot be silent anymore. We need people to speak up. We need people now who have the knowledge, the patience, and the understanding to deconstruct and help deconstruct these people off of these myths that we've brought up with. Religion is fine if you're using it as a tent pole, but it is not fine if you're using it as a rigid structure with no room at all for
Yeah.
leniency on any side of anything. And we have gotten
Yeah.
to the point today where I saw somebody tweet like, This chick was upset because Chick-fil-A had hired a diversity and equity trainer. So she said, as a Christian, this pisses me off. And I'm thinking,
Oh God.
what?
I know. Or
Like,
this
I wanted to
nonsense.
punch a wall.
This nonsense about people freaking out about Target and selling, you know, multicolored clothing to children.
This
It's
is
just
Chick-fil-A. And they're like, they didn't even announce anything. This is just a company
yeah,
position
right.
that they have. And she's like, I will not allow my nuggets to have diversity.
It
Okay.
is a strange world. It is really it's an odd place. It's becoming stranger. So, but yeah,
What I'd like to
you know,
do is, well, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, I don't know if you've ever watched, so a good friend of mine, Matt Monger is also, he's been on Myth Vision a few times before, but I was visiting him about a month ago, and in the course of talking, um, you know, he and I have a friend in common who is transgender,
Sure.
and we, you know, we kind of we were talking about her, and then I mentioned to him, I was like, you know, it's amazing. It is amazing to me. It sort of struck me at just how much more prevalent and common it's becoming,
Right.
right? And I was like, and he was like, yeah, he's like, I've noticed that too, and I think like my I'd never really thought about it in these terms before, but I was like, you know, if it's always been like this, then maybe the most astonishing thing to me is how many of these poor people had to just suppress this for as long as they did, right?
Yep.
I mean, for their whole lives. I'm like, if it's really like with the prevalence that I'm seeing of it
It's
now,
definitely gotten
I'm
worse
like,
since
if it's
2016. I know it's always been there, but I would
yeah,
argue
but
in America,
I
Trump
think
Trump running really
yeah,
did boost it into the limelight because he made it
yeah,
acceptable to say things like Mexico is sending nothing but rapists. You know, he did
right,
that
yeah,
in his announcement. He wasn't even president at the time when he said that. And you know,
yeah,
if you make that your opening statement, it's pretty much fair game from there on in. And now people don't just feel comfortable being bigots, they feel emboldened. And I can't
that too. Yeah,
abide,
it is.
can't abide
Yeah,
that.
I'm on
I
all
won't.
sides of this. It's yeah, it's pretty amazing how many people and how much people will I guess suppress, right? But anyways,
Yeah.
I am probably gonna have to get going
Yeah.
here, but
Yeah. I was going to end it
this
up
was a
here
good
by
chat.
Yeah, I was going to end it up here by saying, why don't you tell people where they can find you? I know you have a
Okay.
documentary series on YouTube. I've watched the first 3 parts already on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll let you tell them a little bit about that, but I want to say, go watch those 3. It will reframe
Oh, thank you.
every single thing you know. And I just have one question that you can answer yes or
Oh
no in the
yes,
end of this. So,
certainly.
with regard to these Dead Sea Scrolls, if I understand
Yep.
everything you're laying out, I understand the first and the second. Are we saying now that these first ones that were found too, not officially, but are we saying that we need to go back and check these things with the same level of authenticity as these later ones that have come? Because this is not the same people, but it is the same
No.
family and parties involved.
Yeah. So I mean, I do get this question from time to time, and I would say I don't think so, because
Okay,
like
perfect.
there's I mean the stuff that people found between 1947 and 1953 is all I don't have any concerns about authenticity in
Sure,
that kind
good,
of
good,
stuff.
good.
Um However, I mean, I would say it's not a bad, and it's not a bad idea to go back and look closely at the collection as a whole, because who knows? I mean, maybe there are some that filtered in. I would say if there are forgeries in the actual among the scrolls that they have at the IAA or at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, it's not many. I
Right.
wouldn't say.
We're talking like
But
sentences and interpolations, maybe here and there, but we're
yeah,
not talking
yeah.
major
So
fragments have been
no,
wholly invented.
no, definitely not.
And so
So
your
yeah,
YouTube
I mean,
is
people can. So it's just my YouTube channel is under my name. It's very inventively titled Kipp Davis. And the series is Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically. There are 3 videos plus this other one about Dead Sea Scrolls forgeries. And I'm in the process of making the next part, which will be on prophecy and what are called the Pesharim, which are like these ancient forms of Bible commentary and interpretation. And hopefully I will be able to get that out in the next few weeks, although it's been busy for me. If I could also say, people can find me on Twitter.
yes,
I also have a
please.
Patreon. Yes. So yeah, you can look me up on Twitter. I have a Patreon. If you like the stuff that I do and you're interested in supporting the work, come and join me on Patreon. And I have an online course
Oh
at
yes.
MVP Courses. And this is not about the Dead Sea Scrolls. I have a course called Ancient Israelite Religions, Facts on the Ground and Propaganda in the Bible. And my course is a look. It's basically a look at how the Hebrew Bible texts intersect with the material culture and with the archaeology, through which I try to show and illustrate how the ancient people who lived in this area during the Iron Age actually practiced religion, what they actually thought about God, and then how the text of the Bible developed that and shaped that and changed many of these messages and stories on the basis of
This is like
royal
pre-Ebionite
ideology.
period. This is pre all of that, right? Like we're going to
So
like
this
early
is
Jewish texts.
pre-Judaism. So the
Yeah.
period I cover is basically from about 1000 BC up to about 200 BCE. So
And if
yeah,
you have
but
any interest at all in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm telling you, man, they're so I won't spoil the mystery, but he has laid out a pretty compelling
they're pretty
case
good.
for
Yeah.
the way we examine things and the way things religious materials are promoted in America. But I just want to say thank you, Dr. Davis, like just for the personal
Thank you, Josh.
conversation and for the inspiration
This was
on
a
a
good
personal level.
chat.
So anytime you ever
I
need me, my
appreciate it.
brother, you can get a hold of me at any time. And it has truly been my pleasure, man. And I
Awesome.
will let you get to your day. Thank you so very much.
You bet, man.